Hi there and welcome to this video looking at Stretch and Challenge. This is based on a Chartered College article written by Anmol Pervez and it's going to take us through some ideas around what can we do with questioning to actually increase stretch and challenge in the classroom. So stretch and challenge is a topic which I think gets a sort of slight misconceptions that we have to be doing something for just our high prioritizing students and that we have to be doing something kind of radically different to our normal classroom practice, when in fact a pedagogical technique that can have a really high impact is to use stretch it questioning. It's quite easy and quite a common kind of groove to fall into, to just accept a correct answer from a student, praise them and sort of move on to the next question. But we don't really, in that sort of scenario, really know if a student has truly grasped a concept. And also we miss an opportunity to kind of encourage them to think more deeply. So stretch it questioning is a way to increase challenge for all our students. The idea of questioning probably doesn't need explaining because it's such a kind of bread and butter skill for us as teachers. But questioning is there to check the depth of understanding that a student has. It's there to reveal and help us to track misconceptions that might be there in our classroom. But really crucially, this session I want to focus on the fact that it's really a key moment in a lesson for us to drive pupils' thinking. So question and answer sort of interactions are varied and the way that we use them is different, but I really want to think for stretch and challenge how we're using questioning to drive pupil thinking. This is an efficient strategy because it doesn't require you to, like I say, create lots of resources, lots of kind of worksheets and things. It's about you just in that moment during your 60 minutes or whatever it is you have with your class, using that interaction of the question and answer format to actually drive really, really high level of challenge and thinking. So what is stretch it questioning? Well, it's a use of follow-up questions for correct answers rather than just accepting a correct answer. And it's to help us move from recall to deeper thinking. There's nothing wrong with recall. It really does have its place and it certainly helps to kind of interrupt that forgetting curve. But it's about moving into a place of maybe more evaluative thinking, which is often what we see in a mark scheme for sort of pushing a child up to the next stage in a sort of rubric, is to actually get into that deeper, more abstract level of thinking. Remember, challenge isn't about higher prioritizing students. It has its place for high prioritizing students, but it's about challenge for everybody, moving up from the stage they're at currently up to the next level. And why would we use it? Well, it's going to improve the quality of student answers, it's going to be that adaptive teaching approach, and it's going to encourage critical thinking. Certainly for some of our students, we need to really move them on at those transition points. So maybe a year 9 student moving into year 10, they're going to enter a much more critical kind of thinking phase if they're moving into Key Stage 4. Our year 11s moving into sort of sixth form, and our sixth formers moving up into that university or post-18 world, they're going to be using their critical thinking skills much more. So we need to start kind of fostering that as early as we can. Okay, so in the article that this is based on, we are offered 3 types of prompts. They are non-directive prompts, where you don't insist on a particular style or content in an answer that you expect to kind of get from the student. A directive prompt, which is where you do insist on a certain style or a certain content or a certain amount for the question that you've asked. And then partially directive, which is that flexible sort of use of both the directive and non-directive prompting to help sort of build an answer with a student. So let's look at some examples. So in the non-directive prompt, really open kind of prompts that you ask that just push the student to explain their answer a bit more. So something really kind of basic and broad, like just could you explain that a bit more? Could you explain that further? Tell me a bit more about that. Now, just as I'm gesturing there, the gestures are really important here because it's not just about it feeling like another directive prompt, so something like, tell me more, which would have a sort of bluntness to it. It's a real body language moment where you sort of, maybe that hand on the chin or that stepping back slightly, a nod, a kind of narrowed eye, like, oh, I'm feeling interested in this. An expansive hand gesture, so, oh, tell me a bit more about that, or, oh, could you just expand on that a bit more? So those gestures and pauses really do help. You might use the pause to hold back on telling the student whether that first moment that they've answered is right or not, because there's a real impulse to want to say, oh yeah, well done, that's right. but maybe they've answered something and you think, okay, I'd like to know a bit more about that before I sort of validate you and tell you that that was right. This encourages a bit more independent thinking. It can build self-efficacy if the student's having to kind of justify themselves. And let's look at an example here. So this is the teacher who wrote this article was a science teacher, so here's a science-based example. I'll just pause for a moment. You could pause the video to read that through. Okay, so in here you can actually see bracketed some non-verbal gestures. Moments like good, develop that for me, and also a nice bit of praise at the end. Well done, Ali, I like your use of technical vocabulary. So the non-directive prompts in there are the moments where the teacher doesn't just expect a certain answer. What is mitosis might be seen as a closed question, but it's quite broad enough for Ali to give a definition. It's not the kind of response where we'd expect maybe one word or one short phrase. Develop that was the non-directive prompt, and then this non-verbal gesture of sort of and at that moment in the non-directive prompt, the teacher might be gesturing to something that's on the board, or they might be saying, and put back in your book, go back to the table that we just looked at, or use the board, the wall display. Those non-directive prompts can often be pointing to kind of the wider set of resources that the teacher has provided. So directive prompts, probably the most common way that I see questioning happening in classrooms that I watch lessons in, is to just ask a question that we expect a really specific answer to. They're okay, these sorts of prompts, they have their place. They certainly help to guide the student, and they can be seen as almost like a scaffolding sort of structuring idea. So in this case, the teacher's asked a specific question. Again, I'll just pause for a second and you could pause the video if you want time to read that. Okay, so what can you tell me about the number of chromosomes in each daughter cell? It seems a bit non-directive because it's quite broad, but it's specific enough that it's probably going to be quite a short answer, or they have 4 to 6 chromosomes. The next part is still directive. What word can we use to describe a full set of chromosomes? And they might not say each daughter cell is diploid, they might just say diploid. So it's almost that building up with direction, the steps that you might need a student to fill in the gaps almost of the process or the set of work that you're looking at. I like directive prompts alongside modelling, especially if you're like under a visualiser and you're sort of looking up to the class and you're saying, and what would I put next? And what do I need to remember here? And what's the key moment or the key word I need to put into this paragraph? So it's quite nice with modelling, particularly those like coping models where we're pretending that we don't really know what we're doing, and giving little moments of flawed practice so that they can kind of improve that and we can metacognitively describe what the next thing would be. Directive prompts are really good for that. So what do I need to do here? What do I need to remember? What does the mark scheme say? They can be really useful. The partially directive prompt, well, they build on the pupil answer. So they might be something that you've had as a sort of closed answer, and then you add a bit more direction, you balance that challenge with that support. So again, final one to look at, and then pause me if you need to. So here we've got the teacher asking that general question, what is mitosis? That's really kind of very directive. And then we've got, so say more about that then. These daughter cells, tell me more about those. And then when the child says diploid, and then you might gesture to the board, just kind of give a nod and an expansive hand gesture, and then the child would say something a bit more. So this requires, I think, the partially directive prompts and those non-directive prompts, they require a kind of really good, solid foundation of trust. We need a relationship with our students. You're not going to get very far if there is any sort of feeling that you're after them or trying to get them or trying to catch them out. And it needs to be, even if it's a bit of a performance, I would hope it isn't a performance, I'd hope you do care about your students deeply, but they need to see that you care and you need to sort of feel like you're really invested in what their answer is. And that you're genuinely interested, even though you might have heard that answer 7 times that week with the different classes you teach. It's like, oh yeah, diploid, that's right, so tell me a bit more about that then. That sort of performative spark of interest is really important. Okay, so I would say definitely, especially for novice teachers, plan these stretch questions. Try to think about what colleagues are using around you, try and get into some classrooms and listen out for them. How are they using different directive, non-directive and partially directive prompts for their questioning? And don't forget, this is for every level. So if you've got a student who's struggling to get basic terms, basic processes, basic knowledge in place, they can still have a directive, non-directive or partially directive prompt in their questioning. And it needs to be something that's part of your classroom practice. It needs to be part of your ongoing work with your class. It's going to feel really alien at first if you're not used to doing it, so build up slowly, but then really build it in regularly. It is really one of the ways that you can drive that deeper thinking. So reflection and maybe discussion if you're using this as a CPD resource in a group. Who do you tend to stretch the most? Do you gravitate towards stretch and challenge questions for your higher prior retainers, and perhaps is that something that you need to bring into every level? Is there any chance that you might move on too quickly? For some of our students, the really abstract developmental questions might be too much, depending on the content that's been taught. So do make sure that you use it judiciously. And is there anything that you could use this for tomorrow? Or if you're watching this on a Friday, Monday. Thanks for watching this, and I really hope that that's been helpful.